The attending physician said Lyra needed emergency surgery within the hour. Her husband nodded, signed the form, and then his phone buzzed. He read the message, typed a reply, and said to no one in particular, "She's in good hands. I'll be back." The nurses exchanged a look. The woman on the gurney did not beg him to stay. She turned her face toward the window, pressed 2 fingers to the small brass compass hanging at her collarbone, and breathed. What none of them knew, not Derek, not his mother who arrived minutes later demanding a better room, not even in the young intern trembling at the foot of the bed, was exactly whose hospital they were all standing in. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 hours earlier, Lyra had been standing near the auction table at the Aldrich Grand when the pain hit. It wasn't gradual. It came all at once, a fist closing somewhere beneath her ribs, and she had gripped the edge of the table and breathed through it the way she always breathed through things. Quietly, without asking for help. She had been feeling off for a week. A dull ache that she attributed to stress, to the long hours at the foundation, to not sleeping well. She had told herself she would call her physician on Monday. It was Saturday night. She had told herself a lot of things that turned out to be untrue. Derek had been across the room, working the crowd the way he always did. Warm handshake, easy laugh, the particular charm of a man who needs people to like him in order to do business. He was good at it. She had always thought that was one of his best qualities, the ability to make anyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. She had not noticed until much later that he had stopped using it on her. When she collapsed, a woman nearby caught her arm. Derek heard the commotion and came quickly. She remembered his face in that moment, genuine alarm, and something else underneath it that she couldn't name until later. Calculation. Just a flash of it, gone before she could be sure it was there. The ambulance came. Derek rode with her in his car. He was there at the ER intake, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, while the admitting nurse ran through the checklist. He answered questions about her insurance. The premium plan, no deductible, without hesitation. She heard him doing it and felt a small, tired gratitude. He knows the insurance information, she thought. He pays attention to that much. The emergency physician was quick and certain. Internal bleeding, likely a ruptured vessel, possibly connected to a stress injury she'd been ignoring. Surgery within the hour, possibly sooner. Derek signed the forms. He was attentive during the explanation, asking the right questions, nodding in the right places. The physician left to prep. A nurse came in to prepare Lyra for transfer to pre-op. Then Derek's phone buzzed. She watched him read the message. She watched his expression shift, not the alarm a moment ago, something warmer and more familiar. He typed a reply and slid the phone into his pocket. "Renee's stuck downtown," he said. "She doesn't have a ride, and she's been waiting." Lyra looked at him. "You're stable," he said. "They've got you. The surgery is scheduled. There's nothing I can do standing here." He said it gently, like he was explaining something reasonable to someone who might be unreasonable about it. "I'll be back before you're out of surgery. I'll be right here when you wake up." She did not say, "Don't go." She did not say, "Please." Her father had taught her, from the time she was old enough to understand anything, that begging people to be who they should already be only tells you they aren't. "Okay," she said. He kissed her forehead. A light, careful kiss, the kind you give someone you've already left, and walked out of the bay. The nurse beside her was very still for a moment. She was young, probably in her first year on this floor, and she had the face of someone who has not yet learned to arrange her expression when she disagrees with what she's seeing. "Is there someone else we can call?" she asked. "No," Lyra said. "I'm fine." She was not fine. But she had learned, over 3 years of this marriage, the difference between fine and functional was enough to get through a surgery. A few minutes later, she heard a new set of heels clicking down the corridor, and before the curtain opened, she already knew whose they were. Gloria Grant entered the way. She always entered rooms like she had been expected and was slightly disappointed by what she found. She looked at the monitoring equipment, at the IV line, at the pre-op gown Lyra was wearing, and sighed with the particular exhaustion of a woman who has decided that other people's emergencies are an inconvenience to her personally. "Where is Derek?" "He left," Lyra said. Gloria pursed her lips. "He'll be back." She pulled a chair close and sat down, arranging her coat over the armrest. "How long does this kind of surgery take?" "A few hours." She looked around the bay. "This is a very small space. Can't they move you somewhere more appropriate? I'll speak to someone." Lyra looked at the ceiling. Her ribs ached. The medication the nurse had given her was taking the edge off, but not all of it. She thought about telling Gloria that the size of the room had no bearing on the quality of the care. She decided against it. Through the partially open curtain, she could see into the corridor, and in the corridor, standing very still near the nurse's station, with a small leather notebook in his hands, was an older man in a gray wool coat. He was watching her bay with calm, unhurried attention. She had not seen Harlan Whitmore in 8 months. He looked the same as he always did, slightly worn, deeply steady, the kind of man who had been through enough that nothing surprised him anymore. He met her eyes. She let out a breath she had been holding for longer than she realized. "Is there anyone I should call?" the young nurse asked again, reappearing to check the IV line. Lyra kept her eyes on Harlan. "There's someone already here," she said. "He knows what to do." The nurse followed her gaze toward the corridor, then looked back at Lyra with a quiet yet sort of understanding. She nodded once, efficiently, and began preparing the transfer documentation. Gloria, who had missed the entire exchange while studying the room for additional flaws to criticize, said nothing more. She was already composing the complaint she intended to deliver to administration. The charge nurse, a woman named Patrice, broad-shouldered and unhurried, the kind of nurse who had seen everything twice, appeared in the doorway. She looked at Gloria. She looked at the notebook in Harlan's hands. She looked at Lyra. Then she straightened her shoulders in a way that meant she had just understood something important. "All right," Patrice said to no one and everyone. "Let's get this floor organized. Everything by the book. Everything." Gloria frowned. She did not understand why a charge nurse would say that in that particular tone. She only knew that the small, efficient woman on the gurney seemed in that moment to be something other than what she had always assumed. The gurney began to move. Lyra pressed her fingers to the brass compass at her collarbone, her father's compass, worn smooth from 30 years of handling before it came to her, and closed her eyes. "Wait," she thought. "It's almost time." To understand why Lyra Grant said nothing, when her husband walked out of her hospital bay, you have to go back to a kitchen table on the south side of the city, and a man named Vincent Thornton, who taught his daughter everything that mattered by example and almost nothing by lecture. Vincent drove a delivery truck before sunrise. He came home in the evening smelling of diesel and cold air, ate whatever was in the pot without complaint, and then sat down at the kitchen table with papers spread under the lamp. Numbers, maps, property assessments, contract trucks with language so dense it took most lawyers twice to parse. Lyra did her homework across from him for years, and sometimes she would catch him with a private smile, the smile of a man who could see a door no one else knew was there. "What are you building, Daddy?" she asked him once. She was 13. He looked up. "A roof," he said. "A big one. Big enough that one day you'll never have to ask anyone for shelter." He folded the paper he'd been reading and set it under his hand. "You'll own the rain." She had laughed, because it made no sense to her. It made perfect sense later. Vincent built the way he did everything, slowly, without announcement, and with the kind of patience that most people mistake for passivity. He acquired a small plot of land adjacent to a failing clinic in 1986, partnered with a man named Harlan Whitmore, a quiet, meticulous real estate attorney with an instinct for medical infrastructure, and over the following years converted it into a functioning regional clinic. Then a small hospital, then a second, then a network. He never moved to a bigger house. He never bought a flashier car. He wore the same work boots for a decade because they still held their shape. The people who knew him as a truck driver kept seeing a truck driver. The people who cashed the checks from Thornton Holdings knew something different, but they were not the kind of people who talked. Lyra grew up watching men in clean suits come to the South Side to shake her father's hand. She did not understand it when she was young. She only catalogued it. The deference in their posture, the way they waited for him to speak first, the way the energy in a room organized itself around him, without him ever raising his voice. Never announce your strength, he told her more than once. Let people show you who they are first. The ones who are kind when they think you have nothing, those are worth knowing. The rest will show their teeth the moment they think you're weak. Watch them, remember them, and never show your hand before it's time. On her 18th birthday, he gave her a brass compass on a worn chain. It was old, predating her by decades, and the metal had gone smooth from handling. He pressed it into her palm. This doesn't just point north, he said. It opens something. One day you'll know what. She wore it from that day forward. She wore it through college, through graduate school, through the 2 years of grief after Vincent died when the K scanned quickly and took him before she was ready. She wore it the night she met Derek Grant at a small networking event, a charity mixer, where she was volunteering and he was working the room. She wore it at their wedding. She had it on the night she collapsed at the Aldrich Grand. She had wanted to know if Derek would love her with nothing. That was the honest reason she had kept her identity quiet, not only her father's philosophy, not only caution, but a genuine test. She had been lonely after Vincent died. She had been aching for someone to lean on. And Derek was attentive then, the way people are in the beginning, before the attention migrates elsewhere. He proposed before she ever told him about the trust. She accepted before she was sure she should. She told herself she would tell him everything once she knew the marriage was real. She told herself she had time. She did not tell him. The time ran out. The marriage turned out not to be real. Looking back, the signs had been there before she was willing to see them. The way his attention wandered whenever she spoke about something that didn't directly involve him. The warmth that came and went in seasons, lavish in public and rationed in private. The small ways he edited her out of decisions he felt entitled to make alone. And eventually, the late nights, the different perfume, the phone he angled away from her. She had not confronted him. Her father had not confronted the man who cheated him in business decades ago, had only said, bitterness costs more than betrayal, and let it go. Lyra held that like a compass point. She watched, she waited. She quietly moved resources and called her father's attorney. She had given the marriage 3 years. 3 years was, she decided, sufficient evidence. But she had not expected the medical emergency. She had expected a quiet evening, a conversation, a decision. Not this. Not a gurney and a surgery and Derek's face as he read Renee's text message and walked out of the room. In the years she had been married, Derek had never once asked her about the trust. He had never asked about Harlan Whitmore, whose name appeared on documents he occasionally glimpsed and dismissed as non-profit committee work. He had never asked why, of all the hospitals in the city, she seemed to move through Greystone Memorial with a particular ease, the staff holding doors for her, the administrator pausing mid-conversation when she passed. He had assumed she was ordinary. He had been busy with his own architecture of assumptions. He did not ask many questions about things he thought he already understood. The prenuptial agreement he signed before the wedding, a document prepared by her attorneys, presented to him by his own, whom she had not chosen and could not speak to about its contents, was a standard form on its surface. Derek had read it the way men read documents they expect to be in their favor, quickly, looking for the things they fear rather than the things they've missed. He had not found the fidelity clause on page 11, subsection C. It was written in plain language, not legalese. His attorney, the one he trusted, had either missed it or chosen not to highlight it. Either way, it was there. It had always been there. And it had simply waited, the way all the important things Vincent Thornton built had waited. Patient, silent, certain. In surgery prep, Lyra let the anesthetic take hold. Her last thought before the darkness came was of her father's kitchen table, the lamp throwing yellow light across the columns of numbers, the private smile of a man who could see a door no one else knew was there. She had always been able to see it too. When she woke up, it would be time to open it. In the hour and a half between Lyra being wheeled into surgery and Derek returning to the hospital, Gloria Grant made herself at home. She moved through the waiting area on the surgical floor with the authority of a woman who had spent decades assuming every room would accommodate her. She pulled 2 chairs together near the window for herself and her coat, asked a passing aide for coffee, real coffee, not the machine kind, and stationed herself like she was attending a board meeting she hadn't bothered to prepare for. Sophie arrived 30 minutes after her mother, still in her gala dress, phone already raised. She scanned the waiting room and settled into a chair diagonal from Gloria, angling the camera around the space the way she always did, looking for content. "We're at Greystone Memorial," she told her followers in a soft, confiding tone. "My sister-in-law had some kind of episode at the charity thing. She's in surgery. Very dramatic." She rolled her eyes slightly, not enough to look cruel on camera, just enough to communicate what she actually thought. A nurse walking past glanced at the phone and kept moving. Gloria had already flagged down the floor administrator, a trim man named Charles Meade, who arrived with a clipboard and a professional smile. "My daughter-in-law is in surgery," Gloria said. "I'd like to know about the status of her room assignment. This waiting area is quite open. We're a private family." She looked around to indicate what she found lacking. "I was told she was in Bay 4 in the ER. That seemed very small for someone in her condition." "Mrs. Grant," Meade said, "I assure you your daughter-in-law received the highest standard of care when she arrived. I'm not suggesting she didn't. I'm suggesting the family accommodations could be better." "I'll look into what's available," he said, which was not a promise to do what she was asking. Gloria watched him go and did not notice that he made his way directly to the far end of the corridor, where an older man in a gray wool coat was standing near the window. The man handed Meade a small folded card. Meade read it, slipped it into his coat pocket, and stood differently after that, like a person who has just been reminded of something important. Sophie caught none of this. She was telling her followers about the gala, the dress code, the canapes that had not been up to standard. Derek arrived at 7:30, jacket back on, a coffee cup from a shop 3 blocks away in his hand. He smelled faintly of a perfume that was not Lyra's. Gloria noted this without commenting. Sophie glanced at him and looked away. "How long?" he asked. "They said a few hours," Gloria told him. "It depends on what they find." Derek sat down and checked his phone. He was on it within 30 seconds, composing a message with the half-attention of a man whose focus was somewhere else. Gloria watched him do this and didn't ask who he was texting. She already knew, broadly, the shape of things. After this, she said quietly, "We need to have the conversation about next steps." Derek looked up. "I know. I brought the folder." "Not tonight, when she's awake. When she's weak," Gloria corrected with the matter-of-fact precision of a woman tactic rather than confessing one. "That's when these conversations go more smoothly. She'll be tired from the surgery. Her defenses will be down. Derek, she has no family, no meaningful assets. She'll go quietly." Derek didn't respond to this directly. He looked back at his phone. Sophie, half listening, murmured something to her camera about being exhausted and needing a real drink. Then she passed now slowly across the waiting area, and for a moment the lens caught the older man in the gray coat, still at his position near the window, still writing in his notebook. Sophie lowered the phone without posting that particular frame. Something about the man's stillness made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't explain. Patrice, the charge nurse, came through the waiting area during a rounds check. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything. The way the wife's husband had left before the surgery started. The way the mother-in-law's posture broadcast ownership of a space that didn't belong to her. The way the younger woman kept filming. Patrice noticed all of it. She filed it in the part of her mind where she kept things that mattered. She also noticed Harlan Whitmore. She had worked Greystone Memorial for 18 years. She had seen him once before, at a board presentation 3 years ago, in a different capacity. She had not connected that memory to anything specific until tonight, when she watched Charles Meade stand differently after receiving his card. She did the math. She went back to the nurse's station and quietly rearranged the end of shift assignments, so that her most experienced nurses were covering the post-surgical bay Lyra would be moved to. She did it without explaining why. They trusted her enough not to ask. Gloria, across the waiting area, pulled the manila folder from her handbag and checked its contents one more time. The divorce papers. The asset summary her attorney had put together based on their best understanding of Lyra's finances. There wasn't much. A small investment account, a consulting contract with a healthcare nonprofit, a car. No property, no significant holdings, no inheritance of note so the surface-level search had turned up. She smoothed the pages, closed the folder, and set it on her knee. Across the room, Harlan wrote something in his notebook, closed it, and slid it into his coat pocket. He glanced once at the folder in Gloria's hands. His expression didn't change, but he took out his phone and sent a text. The reply came in under a minute. He read it, then sent a second message. The recipient of this one took slightly longer to respond. When they did, Harlan read it, set the phone face down on his knee, and looked out the window at the city lights below. Somewhere in this building, in a surgery theater on the 6th floor, Lyra Thornton Grant was being carefully put back together by people who had no idea who they were caring for. Or rather, most of them had no idea. One or two did, and those one or two worked with a particular steadiness that night, a particular attention to the details that matter. The surgeon who led the procedure had trained at two of the best programs in the country. She had been recruited to Greystone Memorial 3 years ago, with an offer that didn't need to be negotiated. She did best work every night, regardless of who was on the table. Tonight she happened to know, from a quiet briefing from administration, that the patient's family situation was complicated and the patient's instructions were clear. Everything by the book. Everything. Outside, the city hummed. In the waiting room, Gloria tapped her fingers against the folder and waited for morning. Dr. Adeyemi came out of the surgery suite at 9:47, with the careful economy of motion that belonged to people who operated on a sustained basis. She pulled off her cap and found Gloria and Derek in the waiting room, Sophie a few feet away with her phone face down for once. The surgery had gone well. The bleeding vessel had been located and repaired. Lyra would be in recovery for 2 to 3 hours, then moved to a room for overnight observation. She would need rest and monitoring for 48 hours minimum. After that, assuming no complications, she could make decisions about her own discharge. How soon can she be transferred to another facility? Derek asked. Dr. Adeyemi looked at him with the expression of someone who has heard many surprising questions and has stopped showing surprise. The patient can request a transfer at any time, she said. That would be entirely her decision once she's conscious and able to communicate. Right, Derek said. But if we wanted to arrange something, her decision, Dr. Adeyemi said again, pleasantly, and then turned to answer a question from a nurse, who had appeared at her elbow. Gloria watched the surgeon walk away and found it mildly irritating that she hadn't seemed to understand the question. Derek slipped his phone out. He'd been texting in 10-minute intervals since he arrived back, the quiet pulse of a parallel conversation running alongside this one. Renee, how much longer, Derek? Surgery done, she's in recovery. Couple hours. Renee, I'm at the hotel. Come when you can, I've got wine, Derek, soon. Just have to handle something first. Renee, the signing thing? Derek, yeah. Renee, good. Finally. Sophie had picked her phone back up and was browsing rather than filming, which was a small improvement. She had posted the surgery update with light editorializing and was watching the comments accumulate in the particular way she found satisfying. What none of them noticed, the hallway beyond the waiting room entrance had shifted. A man in a suit, a hospital trustee, based on the lanyard and the tablet he was reviewing, had positioned himself near the nursing station for the post-surgical ward. When Derek passed through the corridor on his way to the vending machine, the trustee watched him walk by with a stillness that was not in curiosity. Derek didn't notice. He was reading Renee's last message again. In the recovery area, behind the closed doors with the access keypad, the nurses were preparing Lyra's bay, with a thoroughness that Patrice had specified, but not quite explained. Fresh linens, precise equipment checks, the monitoring system calibrated to the highest tier of accuracy. The charge nurse from the previous shift, said something about Patrice always running a tight floor. The day shift charge nurse, arriving for handoff, said Patrice always knew what she was doing. Lyra came out of anesthesia slowly, the way she did most things, without drama, without thrashing, with a gradual reassembly of consciousness that looked, to the nurses monitoring her, like a person deciding to return to a situation they had considered carefully before accepting. Her first coherent thought was, the compass is still there. She could feel it at her collarbone. They had removed it during surgery and replaced it after she had asked for that specifically in her pre-op instructions, which Patrice had noted and ensured. The second thought was, it's time. She was not fully awake when Derek returned from the vending machine and stopped in the corridor outside the recovery unit. Gloria appeared beside him within minutes, as if she had sensed a development. The trustee who had been standing near the nursing station moved slightly, not toward them, just into a more particular orientation. Derek couldn't get in. The nurse at the recovery unit entrance explained, politely, that the patient had left specific instructions about who could access the room. She's listed you as her emergency contact, the nurse said to Derek, but she's asked for her visitor preferences to be honored. She'll indicate when she's ready. Gloria's voice went flat. I'm her mother-in-law. I understand. When she's ready to indicate visitors, we'll let you know. Gloria opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at Derek. Derek looked at the closed door. He had a feeling he couldn't name, the particular unease of a man whose plan requires the cooperation of someone who has stopped cooperating. While they waited, he decided to look through the bag Lyra had brought to the gala. Practical things, her phone, charger, a small organizer. He was looking for the insurance card, he told himself. He flipped through the organizer and found it. He also found a card he didn't immediately recognize, cream-colored, embossed with small clean print. Greystone Health Group Board of Directors, Strategic Review Q3 Lyra Thornton Grant. Controlling shareholder, he stared at it for a moment. His phone buzzed. Renee again. He put the card back in the organizer and answered the text. He told himself it was a non-profit committee thing. She had always done non-profit committee work. It was how she occupied herself while he built things that actually mattered. Controlling shareholder was probably how they titled board members of volunteer-governed foundations. He made a note to ask her about it. Eventually, he did not ask. 40 minutes later, the nurse at the recovery unit door came back out and told them that Mrs. Grant was awake and had asked that her husband come in first. Derek picked up the manila folder. Gloria squeezed his arm. Remember what we discussed. He walked toward the door. Harlan Whitmore, sitting in a chair 15 feet away, watched him go. He was still. He had been still for hours. He had the patience of a man who had seen a great many things move at their own pace toward their inevitable destinations. He took out his phone and sent a brief message to 2 people. Then he stood up, settled his coat, and walked toward the recovery corridor at a pace that was unhurried and entirely certain. Derek had run through the conversation in his head enough times that it felt rehearsed. Not that he would admit to rehearsing it. He would frame it as being direct, as treating Lyra like an adult, as doing her the courtesy of not drawing things out when both of them already knew where they stood. He set the manila folder on the bedside table before he fully registered her face. She looked pale. The IV was still in her arm. There were monitors beside her, their numbers steady and even, and the overhead light had been dimmed to something warmer than the hallway. She was watching him the way she watched most things, completely, and with a patience that had always made him slightly uncomfortable without his being able to say exactly why. He did not apologize for leaving the ER. He thought about it and decided it would make the conversation more difficult. She had been stable. He had come back. That was the relevant sequence. We should talk, huh? He said. Sit down, she said. He sat. He kept the folder within reach. How do you feel? He asked. It came out more like a procedural question than an expression of concern, and he heard it that way himself, but he didn't know how to correct for it after it had already landed. I'm all right, she said. Good. He nodded. That's good. A silence. You left, she said. You were stable. They had you prepped for surgery. There wasn't anything I could have done standing there. He kept his voice even. I came back. You came back smelling of her perfume, Lyra said. When you came back the first time. After the surgery prep. He didn't answer that. She looked at him with a kind of clarity that had nothing exhausted in it. Whatever the anesthesia had done to her body, it had left her mind entirely intact. He found that more unsettling than he had expected. I heard you in the ER, she said, before the surgery. You were on the phone with her, and your voice changed the moment you stepped outside. The way it used to sound when you talked to me. Lyra, I'm not asking you to defend it, she said. I've known for a while. I just wanted you to know that I knew. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for the folder. This doesn't have to be difficult, he said. I've had this drawn up by a good firm. The terms are fair given the circumstances. You keep your accounts, your car, the consulting work. I keep the house and the development company. It's clean. He slid the folder across the table. She looked at it but didn't open it. The prenup protects both of us, he continued. You came into this with a modest situation. You leave with the same. No one gets hurt more than is necessary. She was still looking at the folder. He couldn't tell what she was thinking, which had always been the problem with Lyra. She gave you nothing to read until she was ready to give it. Before I sign anything, she said, there's someone I want you to meet. Lyra, there's no mediator necessary. This is straightforward paperwork. His name is Harlan Whitmore, she said. He was my father's business partner. Derek felt a brief flicker of something, not quite recognition, just the sensation of a word he had seen before in a context he couldn't place. He set it aside. Fine, he said. Bring whoever you want. It doesn't change what the documents say. She reached for the call button beside her bed and pressed it once. The nurse who appeared was not the young one from the ER. This was Patrice, larger, older, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was walking into. Could you let Mr. Whitmore know I'm ready? Lyra said. Patrice nodded, as if this had been the expected request. She left without looking at Derek. As he stepped into the hallway to wave his mother and sister in, he was thinking about logistics, about timing, about whether the folder should have been left in the bag until after Lyra met whoever Harlan Whitmore was, and whether he'd made a tactical error by leading with the paperwork. He turned and stopped. The corridor had changed in the time he'd been inside. Charles Meade, the floor administrator, was standing near the nursing station, but he was not alone. Beside him was a woman Derek had not seen before, in a charcoal blazer, holding a document portfolio. Beyond her, two men in suits he also did not recognize. One of them had the bearing and the briefcase of an attorney. Gloria appeared at his elbow from the waiting room. What is this? I don't know, Derek said. From the far end of the corridor, walking slowly and without hurry, came the older man in the gray wool coat. His notebook was in his hand. His pace was steady and deliberate, the pace of a man arriving at a location he had already been to many times in his head. He met Derek's eyes briefly as he passed, the way people do when they want you to understand that they've seen you without wanting you to mistake it for an introduction. He knocked once on Lyra's door and opened it. Derek followed him in. Gloria, after a beat, followed Derek. Sophie came last, phone lowering slowly as she tried to read the room. Harlan Whitmore stood at the foot of the bed, the woman in the charcoal blazer, and the two men had positioned themselves near the door. Meade was behind them. The room felt different with all of them in it, not crowded, organized, like an arrangement that had been decided before Derek arrived. Lyra looked at each of them in turn. Then she looked at Derek. All right, she said. Her voice was the same one she always used, quiet, unhurried. Now we can have the conversation. Gloria's grip tightened on her folder. Harlan opened his notebook to a page near the back, took out a folded set of documents, and set them on the tray beside the bed. He looked at the room as though he were reading it, understanding what each person in it thought they were about to hear. Then he looked at Lyra. She gave him the smallest nod. He began. My name is Harlan Whitmore, he said. I was Vincent Thornton's business partner for 31 years, and I am the sole executor of the Thornton Family Trust. He said it the way you say something that is simply true, no emphasis, no performance. The weight was in the facts, not in how he delivered them. Vincent Thornton built quietly, Harlan continued. That was his method and his philosophy. In 1986, he acquired a parcel of land adjacent to a failing clinic in the south quarter of this city. He and I restructured that clinic. It became a regional hospital. Over the following 30 years, we added facilities, acquisitions, partnerships, new builds. 11 hospitals, 14 affiliated clinics, a network that now operates across 4 states. He paused. He let that number sit. The network is called the Greystone Health Group. Its current valuation is approximately $2 billion. He looked at Derek. You are standing in one of its hospitals. The room was very quiet. Gloria made a sound, a small exhale that was not quite a laugh, and not quite a gasp. She seemed to be waiting for a second sentence that would explain the first one away. No second sentence came. The Thornton Trust has a single controlling shareholder, Harlan said. Vincent arranged it precisely so that no one could marry into it, flatter their way into it, or take it from her before she was ready to claim it. He turned his eyes to Lyra, his only daughter, who has been the quiet owner of this building and every building in the Greystone system since the trust transferred to her 11 years ago. Sophie's phone was at her side. She had stopped filming at some point in the last 90 seconds without registering that she'd done it. Derek had gone very still. There was a particular stillness that people achieve when they are not processing quickly enough to react, when the information arriving is too far outside their map of the world to find its correct position. He looked at Lyra. She looked back at him. Her face was the same as it always was, composed, watchful, giving nothing away that wasn't chosen. Amani, he started, and then stopped, because he had used the wrong name, the wrong reflex, and the mistake made the room colder somehow. Lyra, she said, gently, like a correction between people who know each other well. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. Gloria had found her voice. This is, she stopped, started again. This is some kind of stunt, some kind of legal maneuver. She looked at Meade. Is this real? Is this person actually Mrs. Grant? Said Margaret Cole. The name meant nothing to Derek. It registered with Meade, who straightened, and with the attorney near the door, who took a small step back. Gloria stopped talking. The woman in the charcoal blazer looked at her with the particular steadiness of someone who does not raise their voice because they have never needed to. I am Margaret Cole, she said. I chair the board of directors of the Greystone Health Group. I received a call from Mr. Whitmore this evening, and I came because, among other reasons, I was told that someone in this hospital had spent a portion of the night asking our staff to move our principal to a smaller room. She let that settle. I wanted to understand that for myself. Gloria opened her mouth, closed it. You were standing in her hospital, Margaret said, asking her own staff to treat her like she didn't belong here. I think it's important that you understand what it was you were actually doing tonight. Derek turned back to Lyra. He was starting to move through the initial stillness into something that looked on the surface like disbelief but was actually closer to calculations, the rapid reassessment of a man realizing that the ground beneath his plan is not where he put it. The development company, he said. His voice was careful now, controlled. Cascade Property Holdings. Harlan nodded. That's a subsidiary of the Thornton Trust, Harlan confirmed. Yes. For how long? From the beginning. The bridge financing on your first development project was routed through Cascade, as were the second and third. You were operating with capital that flowed, indirectly, from your wife's estate. You have been, in effect, spending her money to build a life in which you were planning to leave her. Silence. Derek set the manila folder on the tray table beside the one Harlan had brought. He looked at the 2 folders, side by side, his and hers. Lyra, he said. His voice was quieter. Something in it had changed. The professional composure had dropped an inch, and underneath was something that might have been genuine. I didn't know about any of this. I want you to understand that. She looked at him for a long moment. I know you didn't, she said. That's not the part I need you to understand. He waited. What I need you to understand, she said, is that it was never about the money. I would have given you a good life and never once told you where it came from. If you had stayed tonight, if you had been kind, if you had simply sat in the chair beside that gurney and held my hand while I went into surgery, you would have woken up tomorrow a wealthy man who didn't even know it. Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. That is what you chose to throw away. Not for love. Not for a future you'd built with someone. You threw it away to drive a woman home so she wouldn't have to call a car. You left me in an ER because her comfort was more important than my surgery. She looked at Gloria, at Sophie, at each of them in turn, the way her father had taught her, directly, without apology, without hiding. I heard everything tonight, she said. I heard Derek on the phone in the bay. I heard your plans in the waiting room, Gloria. I heard Sophie's commentary for her followers. I've heard more than all of you have ever thought I heard. She paused. I always have. Gloria set the folder down. Her hand was trembling slightly. The divorce papers she had brought, the ones she had been so certain would solve everything, sat in their neat stack, completely beside the point. Harlan placed his set of documents on the tray table. These, he said, are the actual terms of the prenuptial agreement. Subsection C, page 11, clause. He looked at Derek and waited. Derek picked up the document. He read the relevant paragraph. He read it again. His face did not change dramatically. There was only a small, very specific loss of tension, the deflation of a plan that had been held tightly for months and had just quietly collapsed. I'll need to consult, he started. Of course, Harlan said. Take whatever time you need. The documentation is all in order. The evidence of the circumstances that activate the clause has been preserved. Your attorney can review it at your convenience. In the doorway, Sophie looked at her phone. She had not posted anything in the last 20 minutes, which was unusual for her. She was reading comments on the earlier clip, a slow, dawning comprehension moving across her face. Somewhere across the city, in a hotel room she had chosen for its proximity to a man she expected to be free by morning, Renee Oakes saw a notification. Derek's name in a news alert. She read the first paragraph. She set the phone face down on the comforter and looked at the ceiling. In the recovery room, Lyra settled back against her pillow. She was tired in the way that only happens when a long tension finally releases, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has just put it down. She reached up and pressed 2 fingers to the brass compass at her collarbone. I'd like to rest now, she said. There will be time for the rest of it in the morning. No one in the room said anything. After a moment, one by one, they filed out. What Renee had been at the start was practical. She had not told Derek this in those terms, because practical wasn't a word people used when describing why they chose someone. But that was what it was. Derek was handsome in a way that would age well, professionally plausible, and, most importantly, he was in the process of accumulating something. She was good at recognizing that phase in men. The phase where ambition and access were running parallel, where a well-positioned woman could ride the momentum and call it a relationship. She had not asked too many questions about where his capital came from. She hadn't asked about the wife beyond what Derek volunteered, which was that it was a marriage that had run its course and was in the process of being corrected. She had taken this at face value because she wanted to, and because, at the time, there was no particular reason not to. She found out the way the rest of the world found out, through a phone screen, in a hotel room she had booked expecting a celebration. The notification came from a financial news aggregator she followed for professional reasons. Greystone Health Group Board confirms principal following governance event. She might have scrolled past it. But Derek's name was in the second paragraph, and hers was in the fourth, in the particular way that names appear in news coverage, when the story is not flattering to the person being named. She read it twice. She read the part about the trust, the part about Cascade Property Holdings, the part about the prenuptial clause. She read the quote from the board chair that said, with the kind of diplomatic precision that communicates maximum consequence in the fewest words. The Greystone Health Group's leadership is clear and undisturbed. Mrs. Thornton Grant's position has always been exactly what it is. Renee set the phone face down. She looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then she got up and began repacking the bags she had brought for the weekend. She was a practical woman. She had made a practical assessment. The man she had oriented her months around was not, it turned out, accumulating something. He had been spent something that belonged to someone else, and the someone else had now taken it back. Whatever remained of Derek Grant without his borrowed financial footing was a project she had not signed up for. By the time Derek's calls started coming, first one, then 3, then a long voicemail he would later regret, she was already in a car heading back across the city. She did not listen to the voicemail for several days. When she finally did, she deleted it. Back at Greystone Memorial, the morning brought a specific kind of clarity. Lyra had slept, real sleep, the kind that comes after a long tension finally releases, and woke to find Patrice checking her monitoring numbers with the same steady efficiency she'd brought to everything. "How are you feeling?" Patrice asked. "Better," Lyra said. And then, because it was true and because Patrice had earned an honest answer, "Cleaner." Patrice made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't not a laugh. Derek arrived at 9. He came alone, without Gloria or Sophie, which was a small improvement that Lyra noted without comment. He looked like he had not slept. He sat in the chair beside the bed and set his hands on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment before he looked at her. "I spoke with my attorney this morning," he said. "I assumed you would. The prenup clause, he's reviewing it." Derek paused. "He's advising me that it holds." Lyra said nothing. "The Cascade situation," Derek said. "I had no idea, Lyra. I want to be clear about that." "I know. I would never have." He stopped, ran a hand across his face. "I want you to know that wasn't what it was. With Renee, it wasn't about access or money. I wasn't calculating it." Lyra looked at him. She looked at him the way she had always looked at people when she was deciding what they deserved from her, fully, without the courtesy of pretending not to see. "I know," she said again. "I believe you." He blinked. Then, "You didn't calculate it," she said. "You simply stopped caring about the cost." "That's not better, Derek. That's actually worse. The man who schemes knows what he's doing. The man who stops paying attention to everything, including the person he was supposed to show up for." He was quiet. "You left me in an emergency room to drive another woman home," she said. "Not because you wanted to hurt me. Because you had, somewhere along the way, stopped thinking about whether it would. That's not malice. It's just absence. And absence is its own kind of decision." He didn't argue. That, at least, she gave him credit for. "The documents Harlan brought," she said. "I'd like you to review them today. My lawyers are available if yours have questions. There's no performance here. There's no punishment. There's just the agreement we made, and the circumstances that activated it." He nodded slowly. She reached for the glass of water beside the bed, drank carefully, and set it back down. "There's one more thing," she said. "Your current development projects, the 3 mid-rises. The Cascade Bridge loans will be restructured over 60 days. There's a meeting with the Thornton Trust's real estate division next week that your team should attend. The goal is an orderly transition, not a collapse. I have no interest in watching something you built fall apart." He stared at her. He paused. "You're giving me 60 days? I'm giving the project 60 days, she said. "That's different. The work doesn't deserve to collapse because the marriage did." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of the professional composure, quieter, more plainly himself. "I'm sorry," he said, "for last night, for the phone call, for walking out." He looked at the window. "For the last year, probably." She nodded once. "I know," she said. And this time it carried something different. Not agreement that the apology was sufficient, but acknowledgement that he had said it. She pressed the call button for Patrice. "I'd like Mr. Whitmore when he arrives," she said. "And I'd like some breakfast." Derek stood. He picked up the folder he'd brought, his divorce papers, and set them beside the ones Harlan had left. They looked, side by side, like a contrast study. His version of the future and hers, and they were not the same document at all. "I'll have my attorney call yours today," he said. "Good," she said. He walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold. He turned back once, briefly, the way people do when they're trying to find something to say and can't locate it. Then he turned forward again and walked out. Lyra watched the door settle closed. She reached up and closed her hand around the brass compass. One more thing, she thought. One more step. The divorce was signed in a small conference room at the offices of Lyra's attorneys, and 7 days after the night at Greystone Memorial. Derek came with his own counsel, a different attorney than the one who had reviewed the prenup without reading it carefully enough. This one was younger and more thorough, and his face showed, in brief professional flickers, that he had found the fidelity clause and understood its implications fully. He kept the meeting businesslike. He did not argue the clause's validity. He asked twice about the 60-day transition arrangement on the bridge financing. He was satisfied with the answer both times. Derek signed. His hand did not shake. He had gathered himself in the 7 days since the hospital, that particular composure of a man who has processed a loss and is now managing its logistics. He did not look at Lyra more than necessary. When the documents were signed and the notary had done what notaries do, he shook the hand of Lyra's lead attorney and walked out without looking back. He left with what the prenuptial agreement had always promised him if the clause was triggered: the personal assets he'd brought into the marriage, a vehicle, and the credit score he had built in his own name. The house, which Lyra had never put in joint title, a fact the original attorney had glossed over as standard estate planning, remained with her. The development company's financing, once disentangled from Cascade Property Holdings, left it with 3 stalled projects and a balance sheet that required, generously speaking, creative restructuring. He was not destroyed. He had his name, his profession, his capability. He would build again, differently, more carefully, and without the scaffolding of someone else's invisible estate. That was not nothing, but it was not what he had expected to be standing in at 43. Gloria did not sign anything. There was nothing for her to sign. What she lost in the following weeks was subtler and, in its way, more complete. The Grants had been a name in this city for 2 decades. Not dynasty wealthy, not prominent enough for glossy profiles, but well-positioned in the specific mid-level social register that requires constant maintenance. Invitations to the right events. Seats on the right committees. The easy assumption of welcome in rooms that were not technically open to everyone. That assumption began quietly to malfunction. It started with the charity, whose gala Lyra had attended the night of the emergency. The chair of that board called Margaret Cole, with whom she had a professional connection, and the call lasted 20 minutes. Gloria's co-chair role on a planning committee had, by the next board meeting, been restructured into an advisory position without specific responsibilities. The hospital auxiliary Gloria had chaired for years asked her to step down from the event subcommittee while the family situation resolved. The phrasing was careful. The meaning was clear. Friends who had attended her dinner parties became gradually less available. Not unfriendly, social registers don't work into dramatic declarations, just less available. Calendars became full in the weeks they might have been to her. She had stood in Lyra's hospital and demanded that her staff move her own patient to a smaller room. The staff had witnessed it, the administrator had documented it, and the infraction traveled the way all relevant information travels in institutional networks, precisely to exactly the people for whom it was relevant. Gloria did not lose everything. She retained the house, the car, the social habits of decades. But the permission she had assumed, the opening of doors, the automatic welcome, had been based on a position that turned out not to be hers to occupy. She had been standing in borrowed rooms, and the person who held the towels, Sophie's, was faster. The livestream clip, the one from the waiting room, with her confiding commentary about the dramatic sister-in-law in surgery, had already circulated before the truth became public. When the full story emerged, the clip circulated again, in a different context. The comments changed. Where there had been laughter and eye rolls, relatability content, the uncharitable genre, there was now something else. People rewatching the clip and listening differently. The tone. The ease with which Sophie had framed another person's medical emergency as a performance. The small curled smile when she said very dramatic. Her following dropped quickly. Not all at once, social media losses are rarely clean, but in the particular way that happens when an audience decides they were wrong about someone and begin to correct for it. The apology video she posted 3 weeks later was long and specific and genuinely distressed, which was more than most. It didn't help. The people who had handed her attention had moved it elsewhere. She learned the difference. in practice between watching and being watched. She had built her identity around the former. The latter was not what she had imagined. At Greystone Memorial, Lyra was discharged on the second morning after surgery. The physician had said 48 hours minimum, and it was 46. But her numbers were clean and the attending was satisfied. And Patrice had told her the day before that the floor was clear and there was no clinical reason to hold her. Patrice walked with her to the entrance. The morning light was coming in through the lobby windows, catching the polished floors in a way that made them look almost warm. "Can I say something?" Patrice asked. "Of course." "I've worked this floor for 18 years, Patrice said. "I've seen a lot. People at their worst and their best. And the way you carried yourself that night," she stopped, started again. "You knew who you were the whole time. You didn't need anyone in that room to tell you." Lyra looked at her. There was the particular feeling of being seen accurately, not flattered, not managed, but simply understood, and it landed differently than most things. "My father would have liked you," she said. Patrice smiled. "I get the feeling I would have liked him." Lyra walked through the glass doors into the morning, the brass compass warm at her collarbone. Behind her, the building that bore her family's invisible mark hummed with its ordinary work, rooms being cleaned, diagnoses being made, people at their most frightened being cared for by people who had chosen that work deliberately. She had one more thing she wanted to do. She wanted to go home. The house on Meridian Street had been her father's. Not in the legal sense. Vincent had transferred the title to the trust years before he died, but in the way places become a person's, through decades of early mornings and late nights, through the accumulated evidence of a life lived in a specific set of rooms. The paint had been peeling when she was a child. The floors had always creaked in the same two spots. The kitchen window looked out onto a narrow yard where her father had kept, for reasons she never fully understood, a single overgrown rosebush. She had not renovated it into something new when the trust gave her full authority to do what she liked. She had restored it. There was a difference. Restoration meant returning something to what it had been at its best, not erasing the evidence of use, not pretending the years hadn't happened, but repairing what had broken and protecting what had held. The floors still had their two creaking spots. She had kept them deliberately. Harlan came every few weeks, the way family does when there's no obligation to perform the visit, and so the visit is always genuine. He would arrive mid-afternoon with something practical, a document requiring her attention, occasionally coffee from the place near his office that had been making the same blend for 20 years, and they would sit on the porch for an hour before going over whatever needed going over. He talked about Vincent, not the business Vincent, not the contracts and the acquisitions and the 30 years of building, but the man who had been his friend. The way Vincent had laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. The way he had kept in his wallet for 15 years a photograph of 8-year-old Lyra standing on the porch of this house with her arms crossed, and an expression of serious evaluation that made everyone who saw it feel like they were being assessed. Lyra listened to these stories with the specific quality of attention that is itself a kind of grief, the careful gathering of pieces of a person who is no longer there to fill in the gaps. He used to say you were the real investment, Harlan told her one afternoon. Not the hospitals, not the trust. You. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. He said, "The hospitals will run themselves if I do it right, but the girl has to find her own way to what she's for." Lyra looked at the rosebush. Her father had never explained the rosebush either, and she had decided years ago that that was fine. "I think I know what I'm for," she said. "I know," Harlan said. He smiled, which was an expression that arrived on his face infrequently and meant something when it did. He would have been insufferably proud. She had heard that before. Margaret Cole had written it in her note, those exact words. She didn't mind hearing it twice. It arrived differently from Harlan, who had known Vincent in the kitchen table years, the before sunrise years, the years of the small lamp and the quiet building of something. She had made one significant decision in the weeks since the hospital. She had taken it to the board and they had approved it in a single meeting. The Vincent Thornton Medical Scholarship. Named plainly, without architecture. funded in perpetuity from the trust. Full support, tuition, housing, cost of living for first-generation medical students from low-income backgrounds, enrolled in any accredited program in the 4 states where the Greystone network operated. 8 students per year, selected on academic merit and demonstrate a commitment to community medicine. She had written the mission statement herself. It was 4 sentences. The 4th was her father's. Let people show you who they are. The scholarship announcement went out through the hospital system's communications channels and through the Thornton Trust's own network, and within a week it had been picked up by 3 regional news outlets and 1 national one. None of the coverage used the word billionaire, which she had specifically requested. Several of them used the word legacy, which felt right. She received letters, many of them from prospective applicants, which was expected, and which she read carefully. Some from strangers who had heard the broader story, the hospital, the night of the surgery, Derek and the rest of it, and wanted her to know it had mattered to them. These she read once and filed somewhere private, because they had been offered in good faith and deserved acknowledgement, even if the circumstances they described were not ones she needed to revisit. She did not receive a letter from Derek. She did not expect one. She heard, through channels she didn't seek out but didn't avoid, that he was working, that his development projects had been restructured through a new financing arrangement with a different firm, that he was in a smaller office on the other side of the city, building something more modest and, by the accounts of people who worked with him, with more care than before. She didn't know whether to attribute this to learning or to constraint. She found, when she examined it closely, that she didn't need to know. Renee she didn't hear about at all. That was, she thought, probably as it should be. One evening in September, sitting on the porch as the light went low and orange over the neighborhood, Lyra took the brass compass from its chain. She had never opened it in front of anyone except Harlan on the night of the hospital. She had told him what was inside, and he had wept, very briefly, in the way that people who have been holding grief for a long time weep when something finally gives them permission, small and sudden and then done. Now she opened it alone. The mechanism was simple, a small hinge that released when pressed at a particular angle, revealing a shallow interior. The compass faced itself swung aside on that hinge, and beneath it was the folded slip of paper she had known was there, but had not allowed herself to open until the night of the hospital. She had read it that night. She had read it several times since. Her father's handwriting. Small, even, the handwriting of a man who filled in the numbers on contracts the way he did everything else. You were always enough. She folded the paper back, closed the compass, and sat for a while with it warm in her palm. The rosebush threw a long shadow across the yard. A neighbor's light came on down the street. Somewhere in the city, the hospitals that bore her father's invisible signature kept their long vigil over the people who needed them. She was tired in the good way, the way that means something has been completed, not the way that means something is broken. She thought briefly of the 8 students who would receive their scholarship letters in the spring. She thought about the girl she had been on these porch steps, watching men in clean suits come to shake her father's hand. She thought about what it had taken to be the woman she had become, patience, mostly. The patience her father had given her, the quiet certainty that the truth always comes out in its time. It does not have to be announced. It does not have to be performed. It only has to be true, and then one day the people who thought they knew you find out they never did. And the remarkable thing, the thing that surprised her most, was that she felt no satisfaction at their reckoning, only a kind of spacious calm, room for what came next. She put the compass back on its chain and went inside to make dinner. 2 months after the night at Greystone Memorial, Lyra walked the halls of the hospital not as a patient, but as what she had always been, its principal. She did not announce herself. She did not arrive with a convoy or an escort or the performance of authority. She came through the employee entrance at the back, signed in with the facilities coordinator, and walked the building the way her father had always taught her to understand places, from the inside, where the actual work happened. She stopped at the nursing station on the surgical floor, Patrice was there, midway through a shift briefing, efficient and unhurried. She looked up when Lyra appeared, and something in her face settled into a particular warmth, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. "Good morning," Patrice said. "Good morning," Lyra said. "How's the floor?" "Running well. New resident on night rotation is shaping up. The IV pump on Bay 6 needs servicing." She paused. "The team from the scholarship committee called to confirm next week's site visit. I saw the email. Tell them the East Conference room is available." Already done. Lyra walked the remaining hallways, took the elevator to the administrative floor, reviewed 2 items with the operations director that required a decision only she could make, and was back in her car by 10:30. She drove, as she always had, an ordinary car. The brass compass hung on a small hook beside the front door of the house on Meridian Street. Below a framed photograph of Vincent. The photograph showed him at about 40, younger than Lyra's memories of him, but with the same set to his expression, the private attention of a man who understood things at a different depth than the surface level. The note was framed beside it. Her father's handwriting, 4 words. Visitors sometimes asked about it. She told them it was something her father wrote. She didn't explain further. It didn't need explanation. The 4 words were sufficient on their own. You were always enough. What he had meant, she understood now, was not that she had nothing to build. She had built, and was building, and would continue. He had meant that the building was never meant to prove something. It was only meant to be done because it was worth doing. Because medicine reaches people in the moments when they cannot reach themselves, and someone has to ensure that the reaching is possible. That had always been the point of what Vincent built. Not the valuation. Not the strategic position, not the 30 years of careful acquisition and patient growth. The point was that people in this city, people in 4 states, had somewhere to go when they were frightened and broken. And the somewhere would be good, because someone had paid attention. She had paid attention to the scholarship the way he would have. 8 students, first generation. Community medicine focus. The criteria were simple and the selection was rigorous, and in May the first 8 would be named and notified, and each of them would receive a letter that said, in plainer terms than her father might have used, but with the same essential content. You were always enough. Here is the room. Harlan was on the porch when she got home, which meant he had let himself in with the key she had given him, and made coffee without asking, which was exactly the kind of presumption she would allow only him. He handed her a mug. They sat. The rosebush was doing something in the October light, changing color in a way she had never quite noticed before, the leaves going from deep green to a muted amber that was more interesting than either. "Margaret sends her regards," Harlan said. "She sent a note last week." "I know," she mentioned. He sipped his coffee. "She's going to push for you to take the co-chair of the Regional Healthcare Coalition." "I know. What will you tell her?" Lyra considered the question in the way she considered most things without hurrying it. "Yes," she said, eventually. Harlan nodded as if this were the answer he had expected. They sat in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had known each other through something that mattered, and come out on the other side of it changed in ways that were, on balance, clarifying. The city moved around the quiet street. Somewhere inside the house, a light was on that she had left on in the kitchen, and the yellow of it came through the window and lay across the porch boards in the same angle it had lain when Vincent sat here in the evenings after his route. Different light, same angle. Some geometry is durable. She held the mug in both hands and looked at the street. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever stayed quiet when you had every reason to speak, if you've ever waited when you had every reason to leave, then you already know what the compass was for. It wasn't to find north. It was to remember that you always knew where you were. Leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you'd like more stories about the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, subscribe. There are more of them.